Boy, oh boy, I cannot wait to switch the iPhone to portless. How cool is that?
Sorry, Craig, the EU isn't gonna let that happen.
Well, maybe if we adopt USB-C into the MagSafe
No.
Well, perhaps if we could talk with our manufacturers about keeping Lightning on the US model and then the...
No.
But what you don't understand, Drew, is that the e-waste...
Stop.
Okay, well, Drew, we really truly need to have something controversial. We're not pushing the boundaries of iPhone unless we can remove something.
Alright, but you can't remove the port. It's not gonna happen.
Well... who's to say? I mean, we've already removed the SIM tray, we've already removed the home button, we already removed the headphone jack. What is there else to remove?
I don't know, but don't get rid of the port. Maybe work on removing the camera bump?
That sounds difficult. We need something more controversial, though.
Just don't do anything stupid.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Craig, no. Do not. What are you thinking?
Who's to say?
Uh-oh, let's begin. Alright, it's worth mentioning that we're very early within the iPhone 15 development process. Just as a reminder, I have to say this every year, Apple doesn't start mass production of the flagship iPhones until around May or June, so that means we've got plenty of months of unfinalized reports, leaks that don't really mean anything because Apple hasn't decided on features or designs yet. However, fairly reputable analysts and leakers such as Ming-Chi Kuo and even Shrimp Apple Pro, who has gotten a lot of things right in the past few months, they have both agreed on this Project Bongo, which sounds like a joke, and it very likely is, but they both point to the concept that Apple is working on removing the physical buttons from the iPhone and replacing them with solid-state buttons, so much similar to how Apple switched to the solid-state home button on the iPhone 7, where the Taptic engine makes it feel like you're actually clicking, but you're not actually clicking. Apple's very good at that, especially with their MacBook trackpads. They want to expand that fake clicking to the volume buttons and even the power button, and I guess the general consensus from the public on this report is why? Like, who has a problem with these physical buttons? Are they that big a deal? And I tend to mostly agree. You know, I could understand switching to the solid-state home button on the iPhone 7 helped a lot with water resistance, because the old physical home button physically clicked inward and literally left a gap between where the button was and where the front glass was. You don't really have that same argument here, because iPhones are already the most water-resistant phones on the market. I know this from first-hand experience. I have taken my own 13 Pro Max with no case in salt water 20 feet deep and brought it back, and it still works perfectly fine. And I've done that multiple times, for the record. So the concept that the next iPhone is going to be even more water-resistant because the solid-state buttons, I don't think that's a good case. I mean, you can easily see in iPhone teardowns and stuff, water is not easily getting in through those buttons. And I'm also more curious about how much complexity that adds to the overall iPhone design unnecessarily, because for one, most people use a case on their phones, and most cases don't let you press the actual physical buttons. They put a layer of rubber or leather or metal or something else on top of those buttons, which means that the Taptic buttons they would be replacing with the volume and power, they would have to not just register a finger pressing them, but also non-fleshy materials pressing down on those buttons, which probably requires a very particular algorithm so that they don't go off accidentally when being pushed against things like on your desk or in your pocket. Maybe it helps with UI submersion a little bit. Like, I could imagine the Taptic feedback being a bit more satisfying if when you held down on the volume button, you felt like the physical volume button itself was like making Taptic sounds like your digital crown does on your Apple Watch, where it's like dunk, and then you get a harder tap when it reaches the full volume. We kind of already have that, but Kuo is saying they're achieving this by adding additional Taptic engines to the design, and this is where the report all falls apart to me, because removing things from the iPhone to free up more space on the inside for better cameras or better battery is one thing, but if you're adding additional Taptic engines, that has to be taking up more space than the very basic, very simple plastic tabs that click on our current iPhones. They are incredibly thin, and if you've seen teardowns, you know that these buttons are not occupying a ton of space. That insignificant amount of travel when you click inward is not taking up precious space. space, and it definitely would not be more space effective to switch to having multiple taptic engines inside the iPhone instead of just one. Maybe there's some UI thing I can't imagine right now, but I just imagine it being an absolute nightmare when it comes to iOS crashing or hard resets that you have to do when you need to like hold down all of the buttons on your iPhone in order to get it to reboot. If the software is crashing, how are the buttons gonna know when you're pressing it correctly? So there's all these downsides of switching to solid state buttons, and what are the upsides? I guess Apple gets to feel like they're being controversial in some way. If there was some argument being made that this would increase battery life by a significant margin, or this would allow the iPhone to become like a complete underwater beast when it comes to how deep you could take it, like the iPhone Ultra with its solid state buttons can go 100 meters deep. But we all know the biggest limiting factor with iPhone water resistance comes more down to the microphones and the speakers, not really the buttons. Plus the charge port, which I don't think Apple's interested in getting rid of, given Jaws's comments about e-waste. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and this has backfired on me multiple times, but I'm going to predict that this is one of those things that we hear about now, and then all of these rumors goes way quiet as we get closer to the iPhone 15 launch. This is when all the analysts and leakers feel very comfortable being bold and making these crazy claims. Oh yeah, they're gonna switch to solid state buttons, but by the time the iPhone 15 launches, we're all gonna forget about this video. We're all gonna forget about this conversation, and along the way, someone's gonna say, actually, Apple changed their mind. It's decided to stick with the physical buttons. Sometimes I'm wrong on these claims, but I did end up being right about MagSafe not coming to the iPad in any way, shape, or form. Despite what a lot of other reputable sources were claiming, I predicted that Apple was gonna end up scrapping that idea, or that the idea was completely made up by the leak community. I'm getting very similar vibes about the solid state button leak this time. I don't think it's going to happen. Does Apple have internal prototypes that have solid state buttons that you just push down on? Sure, that wouldn't surprise me at all if they have an internal project where they're messing around with it. Will it make it to the market though? I don't think this generation, or perhaps any generation, especially when Apple is showing no interest in removing physical buttons from so many other products. Like the Apple Watch still has physical side buttons. The Digital Crown is still physical. They could have gone haptic with that years ago, and they chose not to. And this is way more water resistant than the iPhone is. iPads used to be all about virtual displays and virtual keyboards. Now they're upselling people on physical keyboards, physical buttons all the time, because people like that tactile feel. That's why Apple went back to the traditional Magic Keyboard design on MacBooks and ditched the butterfly keys, because that tactile feel was not as good as the Magic Keyboard was. So I don't think Apple's ready to completely write off all physical buttons yet, and if they were, they definitely wouldn't start on the iPhone, because that's their bestseller, that's their bread and butter. I feel like if they wanted to head that way, they would start by making the side button on the Apple Watch taptic, because you're a lot more limited by physical space with these products. Not as much on the iPhone, and again, these are still physically clicking, and Apple seems fine with that. So, do you guys think that the solid state button thing is going to happen, or do you agree with me that this is going to end up being canceled before the iPhone 15 even enters production? All your wrong predictions, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.